So hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Today we have a very special guest with us and a great name for the first guest, which is Ryan. Ryan's a sales director for an automation software company and really brings just a wealth of knowledge across, different like subjects. So he did everything from being a whitewater rafting instructor in Japan, which I'm really curious about to learn more. I spent 2 weeks in Japan myself, and I have a fun story about that trip also. So did that for a bit, was a technical recruiter, right? Is that right? Yeah.
Yep.
So probably we'll be able to give all of you some good insight onto you trying to land your first tech sales job, since I know a lot of you who are watching these videos, that's what you're trying to do, is to get your foot into the door into tech sales. And of course, more recently, he's that sales director and he sells to customers and has a team that sells to customers. Not only that, but I'd say a big portion of Ryan's background and what he's trying to do as well is, like me, share knowledge in the world with his own YouTube channel. So I'll put that in the link below. If anyone's interested, definitely check him out. And more recently, we're just talking about his, I guess, girlfriend or fiance now.
Right.
Ryan's looking to get married in August, which is pretty awesome as well. And going to a trip that I'm very jealous about in Barcelona, Rome. Was there anywhere else?
I don't want to make the whole audience jealous. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're going to Barcelona. We're going to Barcelona. We're going island hopping around the Mediterranean. There's a bunch of places I don't even know. Landing in Rome,
Yeah.
then up and down Tuscany, and then Croatia. Croatia is the big one that I
Yeah.
did not
Nice.
know was they filmed a lot of Game of Thrones stuff.
Okay.
So
Game of Thrones fan?
like a lot of like yeah, oh yeah. You watch like stuff from like King's Landing, things like that. It's all
Oh,
like
cool.
Croatia, which I did not know until doing the research.
Yeah, I've always wanted to see like the real life version of what's it is it the Spire and like the Hobbit, the Lord of the Rings series, where they have like the grass huts. I always thought that would be really
Oh
cool
yeah, the
to see.
Shire. The
The Shire,
Shire.
yeah, not Spire,
Yeah.
Shire, yeah.
Oh
Okay.
man. Yeah, I mean we could talk about sales or we could talk about nerd stuff, man. I'll go. I love it. I watch Lord of the Rings all the time. My fiance is an in-house counsel, so she's an attorney, but her big
Awesome.
like if she ever watches this, I might get in trouble, but her big like moment, Lord of the Rings, you put that movie on, she knows every line.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Well, sweet. So thanks for joining us. And again, you have, well, for everyone listening, you have double Ryan, so double the power here.
R
But I'm
squared.
curious, let's start a little bit with your background and how you ended up becoming a sales director and how you got into sales in the first place, especially coming from a background of living in Japan and being a whitewater rafting instructor. Walk us through that and how that slowly progressed.
Sure. So it's a great question, but a little bit, I guess when I first started, so I always loved people and I always wanted to know how people, what made people tick, what, drives people. And I've always been kind of that natural, like I wanted to like learn. So I feel like in sales, you have to be a good listener. I'm not saying I'm the best listener. I like to talk as well, but I like to at least learn about the other person and also just kind of like, how society goes. So when I first started, actually, I was thinking about that this morning when we were chatting the other day, that my first time selling stuff was like in middle school. I'd go door to door selling. I'd sell magazines.
Oh, good for you.
And that was like my kind of first like I actually really enjoy this. I'm meeting cool people. There's always fun stories. It's middle school. My prize at the time was I got a pizza party for friends. It wasn't like cash or anything like that, but it was always about kind of like, learning more about people and understanding that. And the first book that I kind of like got me into, kind of like the art of self-improvement was Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. And that was a big one for me. So that was kind of my kind of like, oh, be proactive, learn about the other person, sharpen the blade. And then I got into recruiting in Tokyo. So as you mentioned, I was a whitewater rafting instructor in Japan. One of the best
How is
jobs
whitewater
ever.
rafting in Japan, by the way? I've
It's
done it
very
in the
fun.
US,
It's
but not in
super
Japan.
cool.
Okay.
It's kind of a crazy story. But originally I had read an article in Outside Magazine about this guy who'd done this bike trip all across Japan. It made me very like, wow, I would love to recreate this. And I actually wrote to the guy
Hmm.
And he wrote to me back saying like, hey, here's a number of companies that like are really cool. Like you'd really get a lot out of it. And that made me like, okay. And I tried to do study abroad
Mhm.
and didn't get in. Actually, like I helped my friend get in. I basically gave him all the answers to this one test, and he got in, and I didn't. And he was like, "My God, I'm so sorry." Oh, don't worry about it. I'll figure it out. I'll do my own thing. And I did a backpacking trip my first time. Did this is back in college, kind
Mhm.
of the summer trip. Checked out all the sites, and I'm on this bus and I meet this other guy, and it was kind of just like, kind of like the nod. What brings you to Japan? You start a conversation, and he asked, "How come you didn't do study abroad?" I'm like, "Well, I didn't get in, but I'm having a blast." He's like, "Well, you should hit me up because I'm the head of study abroad for the entire like UC system."
Wow.
And that's just like a crazy, 3 months later, I got back in. I was in the program, lived at the base of Mount Fuji for 6 months. Then the story keeps going, but like long story short, all these series of things was just natural stuff that we use in sales, how to network, how to open up to people. And it's always gotten me like kind of that ability of just like you never know where relationships can go. Some of the jobs you put to me was simply through networking. A lot of people who I had met 10 years before that we stayed friends, we followed up with each other, professional courtesies, and then all of a sudden the right opportunity presented itself. So it's kind of like as a natural salesperson, you got to be able to open up to people. And in our society, this sounds very like political, but in our society, we're getting closed off all the time, and we're not
Yeah.
we're not opening up as much as we once did. And if you're, I think, a good salesperson, you got to be willing to just like, hey, open up, talk to the person next to you, practice with small things. You go to the person at the supermarket, small dialogue back and forth, those little things instead of just like, let me put in my number and get out of here. Like those small things equal big things down the road that will serve you.
So I'm really curious. Two things. Why Japan, first of all, versus other countries? Are you like an anime fan or something? You just really love
I
Japan?
was. I was in high school. I really was. I loved
Okay.
Dragon Ball Z. I was
Yeah.
a total like, yeah, I love that growing up.
Do you speak any
Um,
Japanese from your
I
time there?
do. So,
Nice.
I mean,
Yeah.
that was kind of how I learned foreign language was I wasn't the best when I got over there. I had read a few books,
Mhm.
but it was actually because of rafting. And actually that story was went over there. I met the guy who started the first rafting company in Japan. They found out about me because I'd done like some study abroad and knew Japanese, but also was a rafting guide in California.
Mhm.
So they were like, "Hey, do you want to come over?" And that was supposed to be just a 3 month gig. And I had such a blast. And I was the first person they ever gave a visa to in their company. And that turned into a 7 year, you know, thing
Yeah.
that was a blast. I loved every second of it. But it was definitely something that I enjoyed in my 20s, and decided I wanted to like I needed to kind of definitely I can't just have river rafting guide if I want to like, have more in life. It's still fun. I love to do it. I live now in Oregon where I can do rafting and I do kayaking whenever I want, which is cool. But that's kind of how I got into sales, where I started with this company. I was working every single day, but over time, competitors started coming in. So the amount of work started shrinking. It started going from 6 days a week to 5 days a week to 4 days a week. All right, well, I need something else to kind of like reinvent myself. I got hooked up with a recruiting company, recruiting agency, worked with American companies and Japanese companies. It's about 300 people, back to basic sales, cold calling, 100, 200 times a day. And you had to do this in English and Japanese. So you had to learn
Wow.
pretty
Okay. I
fast.
didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was like a draw system commission. So you have to make your salary back plus more so you just stay in the job. So the average span of a person there was like 3 months. I was there for 3 years and left on great terms with the CEO. I was basically like, hey, I want to move back to California. I'm not going to competitor or anything.
Mhm.
So, and that was a great learning experience because back in the day, now they have different terms like, okay, you have your account executive, your business development person, your sourcer in recruiting. Back then, it was just full cycle. You're doing all your business development, you're doing all your sourcing, you're learning sales stuff all on your own.
Yeah.
that's kind of how I learned, where I listened to Brian Tracy on the way home in the Tokyo subway, right? And then practice those things that you're learning the next day in the conversations. So
Well,
it's education and application at like a fast pace.
yeah, well, I feel like we should do a whole other interview just talking about like how to get around Japan and the coolness of Japan. Because you're the second person I've talked to, by the way, that I actually had a salesperson I worked with back at my time at Citrix, and he lived in Japan. I think it was like 7, 8 years as well. He actually found his now wife when he lived over in Japan. And when I went, he actually created a whole like super detailed itinerary for my 2 week trip. So I did the bullet train and all that good stuff too.
That's
But
awesome.
it was a ton of fun. I love
What
Japan.
what was your
Best
favorite
food
what was your
ever.
favorite point? What was your favorite part of the trip?
I mean, Kyoto is really awesome. I loved Kyoto. I love the deer park at Nara. That was just like very unique. And like I rode my bike around that whole area, up the mountains, went really fast down on my bike. It was just so much fun. There's a huge story around that. Like the friends I went with. Long story short, for the everyone listening, I used to be a big video gamer, and the two friends I went with were friends I met like virtually playing games. Met one of them in person before, but the other one I've never even met before. And we all flew there separate times from separate places. And we're like, when everyone asks, "Oh, how'd you guys meet?" We're like, "We met online." It's so funny to everyone. But yeah, now we're like lifelong friends. I one in particular I talk to all the time. A good friend of mine. He actually lives in he was in San Diego. Now he lives in like the San Jose area. He's like almost like a nomad. He goes all over the place. But going back to your recruiter, because I think your experience there is what's going to be really interesting to a lot of people listening. What, from your experience, have you seen from a candidate perspective work really well for candidates? And that, an interview and a resume is basically them trying to sell themselves. So,
Yeah,
what can candidates do that are trying to get into tech sales that would make them stand out from the rest? And then what are those maybe common pitfalls or mistakes you've seen from individuals that are, again, trying to get their first step into tech sales?
sure. So it's a loaded question. There's a
Yeah.
lot that can be kind of said on this. Let me start with kind of like maybe some common things that are red flags to recruiters that kind of come up. So one of the ones that's the easiest that people forget about is your email. Please have just a simple your initials or first and last name at Gmail. Don't have something crazy. I have certain friends that I'm doing like resume kind of rewrites for and helping them out, and they'll have this crazy email that is also something that might be like a joke for like their gamer name or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That is something they've had since high school. Please keep it as professional as possible.
I still have my email from middle school, and it's
Dude, me
still
too. I
tied
still
to
have the
some of
same
my
high school.
stuff.
Yeah.
And I went to Wells Fargo one time, and it's like my old middle school one is like Speed Demon something at yahoo.com. And she's like, "Is
Right?
your
Yeah.
email Speed Demon?" And she was laughing at me. She was reading it. I'm like, "Yes, that's my old middle school. I don't know why it's still on this account, but yes, it is." So that's a great point there.
Yeah, and if I was like somebody who's hiring, like, hey, I need to hire 10 salespeople that are going to be talking to B2B, like people that are going to be in CEO status, and he has an email like Speed Demon, right? So no offense, it's like those things
No
kind of come
offense
up to my
taken. I know
mind,
it's awful.
right? Yeah. So you want to make sure that you have a good email. You want to make sure that you're right. Your resume is the whole tech sales versus a recruiter is very synergistic. It overlaps. When you're going into an interview, you have to sell yourself. It's the same idea as like you doing a demo, showcasing your portfolio or products or brand, getting your, closing, getting a deal done is them giving you an offer letter. It's a very same format. So you can think of it in kind of two lanes very synergistically, very parallel. And another thing that I would say is too lengthy resumes that go on forever, or they are things that are not relevant to the job, right? There's a lot of students that have things that I'm like, this has nothing to do with sales. It's very nice, and I'm sure they're very proud of it. And people want to put what they're proud of on the resume. right? It's something that's very true and attached to them. You have to think of yourself in the recruiter's mindset and the hiring manager's mindset. The biggest pitfall, I would say, during the interview is they make it too much about them. They
Mm.
make it too much about, here's what I want. Here's the salary I want. Here's what I want. And nowadays, it's a little bit like it can come off too aggressive, and you're not thinking about the company. The hiring manager, they report to their director or the CEO or the HR director. They care about you, but not that much. And you got to think in terms of what they're seeing. And if people spend 5 extra minutes knowing about the history of the company, the values, where the company's going, and can kind of tailor their approach to being more about like, I know who I am, I know where I want to go, but I also know where you guys want to go. And and I've done my research and I want you guys to be the vehicle that we both win. It's a win-win relationship. I'm going to make the company better. It's going to make me better as well. If you can kind of have that vibe in the interview, I think that will resonate better with the hiring manager.
Yeah, I think that's all great advice. And then from a candidate recruiter perspective, because I talk to students about this all the time. When you were a recruiter and a candidate would ask you for advice on how to be successful during the interview process, what was your take on that? Was that something you'd want to help them with? Because you got incentivized on them getting the job. So I usually tell, and I'm curious your take, I usually tell my students that use a recruiter to your advantage. They have a joint interest in you being successful and you getting the role because that's how they hit their KPIs. That's how they get paid, especially if it's a third party recruiting firm. What's your take on that? I'm curious to get your perspective since you've lived it.
So, just so I understand, so the question's kind of more like, how would I instruct the candidates on
Yeah,
how to
so
be
they're
like more
asking you,
successful?
can
Yeah.
you tell me about the hiring manager, some tips to be successful during the interview process, like really
I
getting
mean,
into, the
it's
weeds on.
overall just a good way to basically create another relationship. Even if you don't, a lot of people think like, you work for me. And like when they talk to recruiters, a lot of people come to me like, well, don't you work for me? Like, no, the company pays me. They like, I'm here to help you and I want to help you. So, but overall, they're incentivized more from the company, their hiring company, to
Mhm.
create the best fit for them. The best way that candidates can approach this is develop a relationship, and that's not just short term, but it's long term. And be the one that follows up with them very lightly. They are, if you kind of get an idea of a recruiter, they're looking at 200 to 300 resumes nowadays per day. Back in the past, it maybe not have been that much, but right now it's flooded with resumes all the time. They have to sift through a lot of stuff. They can't talk to everybody. And a lot of people, one of the biggest complaints candidates have is like, well, I never heard back. I got ghosted. It's like, trust me, if they were to reject every single person that comes across their desk, that's a full-time job in itself.
Yeah,
So
for
give them
sure.
a little credit, a little bit. So the best thing you can do is come into it not being too needy, not being too aggressive, making a relationship, asking the recruiter at the end, where do you think I should go? Is there also any other things that you think I should be applying to? Or any other types of, you know, styles of positions, maybe not in sales, but another thing that you think I'd be a better fit for. I'd love to get your opinion. Is it okay if we keep in contact? And the same thing. It's the same thing with sales that we usually do. That you kind of sell the recruiter on just making a great lifelong relationship. And then periodically, like if they say like I'm going to send your resume to my higher up, great. And you just do like quick text messages or a simple email, 2 sentences. Hey, just wanted to check in. How's everything? Very lightly, not aggressively. And you have to have that vibe that even if the job doesn't work out, if they like you, they'll be your biggest promoter. And
Yeah.
they might promote you to other companies down the road. And I've had this happen to me, and I've done it myself. This
Yeah.
guy, like, I love this person. There's one person, for example, that I'll give you like a karma story. Um, this is kind of funny, but there was one person I met that was not, we already were like in process for a role. It was really tough to kind of tuck them in there. It was a timing thing. But I felt that this candidate, like somebody needs to hire this person. Like this person is a rock star. They're going to be great. I ended up pitching it to somebody else. They got the job.
Hmm.
2 years later, that person had moved up into the company. And then they were pitching me for one of their senior roles.
Oh, funny. Yeah.
Really crazy.
Yeah,
But
that's
that's
cool.
kind of how that can happen. And
Yeah,
so obviously when people are looking in the market right now, they're looking for the short term because they need a job. They want to get their feet wet. They want to jump in. It's good to be in the beginning, definitely thinking about that. How can I strategically place myself and position myself? But don't throw it away. Keep those relationships because that's kind of what's going to serve you 2, 5, 10, 20 years from now. And even if nothing happened from that relationship, it's just good karma. I don't know. It's good energy. And I've seen it happen in multiple instances. I could talk all day on like
yeah,
other examples, but when you're talking to hiring managers or people in other companies, look beyond that first interaction.
for sure. Yeah, relationship building is the key for getting jobs as well, 100%. When
Yeah.
we connected offline, the other day, I mentioned how I ended up getting a verbal offer. They rescinded the job, and then go figure, 2 years later, that hiring manager that wanted me on his team but just couldn't bring me on actually recommended me for my last job. And I worked there for 4 years. So sometimes like the universe just does something magical. And if you are likable and you're just a good human being and you treat people like you want to be treated, man, what comes around goes around almost always. It's just a matter of
Exactly.
you just never know. But let's shift gears a little bit. So, talked a lot about recruitment. Now you're a sales director. I would
Yeah.
imagine you didn't go directly from recruiting to being a sales director, right? There's some steps in between. Were you an SDR at all or an AE? Like, how did that progression happen?
I mean, there's a lot of instances where more account executive than SDR. I've done SDR more on the recruiting stance when you're like kind of just you're looking for business and you're trying to book business. Um, I've always kind of been more of a full cycle person. I kind of skip the ASDR in like the traditional sense, and now I've
Well,
definitely
you
been
kind of
more
were
of a
as a recruiter
yeah,
almost.
as a recruiter,
So,
it's kind of like, well, it wasn't called SDR, but that's pretty much exactly what I
similar.
was
Yeah.
doing, was cold calling and setting up appointments
Yeah.
with businesses, going to the businesses, doing a demonstration. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Back in the day with not to age myself, but it was just called sales. It wasn't called now there it's like the medical industry where it used to be the doctor. Now there's all these specialists. It's the same thing with sales. Now we have all these specific specialty roles that are carved out to do certain responsibilities. Back in the day, I think salespeople were just doing all of it. That was what you had to do. So now, yeah, now I don't have to do as much cold calling as I once did. I get warm leads or people set it up for me and I kind of helped with the account. So closing is a big deal,
Mm-hmm.
as well as like relationship building and communication. Really getting that rapport building with the customer. So that's kind of now my bread and butter and how to teach people in my team every instance on where their headspace is, to the soft skills, to the hard skills, to the specific techniques that will give them more probability for success. And there's an age old thing where I do believe in if you build the people will build the business.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. I always hear the term that outside of the applications that a company needs to run the business, you have the people. They're the number one resource or the biggest expense. They make the biggest impact. And then following that is the actual, of course, tech that we're selling as tech sales professionals, because an app actually brings an idea to life and you need apps in order to get things done. So just some food for thought there for everyone else.
Yeah.
So obviously my channel is more focused on sales engineers, hence the League of Sales Engineers. So I think something that would be interesting for the audience to hear as well is, can you walk me through in your opinion what that relationship should look like, and the division of role between like an account executive and a sales engineer, and the importance of them working together. Maybe some things you've seen in the past, or maybe you haven't worked much with sales engineers. That's okay too. I'm curious to get your take there.
So the sales engineer, in my opinion, should be looking at the industry and all the metrics and kind of creating the sales funnel to make it easier for the account executives and the SDR. They're like they're really good with numbers and they're really good with ideas. And they're kind of combining those things to create it's really like engineering. It's an art and science that you're making it so your sales process is super streamlined, most efficient, optimized, right? Your SDR is basically carrying it out to get the best leads, creating that pool. Your account executive is now trying to maximize the results and keep that as long as possible and keep that relationship going for your size of the market. I hope I'm not using too much complexity,
Oh,
but
I think you're good. Yeah.
okay. In terms of the communication, it should be a constant dance with everybody on the sales team. I would say that the SDR and the account executives should talk probably the most, but your sales engineer should be talking with the team once a week and getting great feedback and perspective from everybody on what's working and what's not working. They should be very aware of kind of the industry standards, what the competition's doing, but also talking to the SDR, AE in like team meetings, but also privately one-on-one
Mm.
and kind of hearing like, hey, what's working for you? What are you keeping track of certain numbers? Is there certain things that you're doing? I saw that you did a great job on these things. You got these leads. What was it that made it happen? And you have to be very like journalistic, very aware of what's happening on your team, on what's working and what's not working. What is the strengths and weaknesses of everybody? Does the group jive together? Do they complement each other? So as the sales engineer, it's you have to take that reverse funnel approach and look at the numbers and how to maximize that. I hope that's too much, but it's yeah, if you're a math fiend, sales engineer is awesome. Which I always loved math. I don't know, hated history, but
Well,
getting more
there's
into
always
it
room
now as I'm
for
more of a leader, right?
always a room for another Ryan as an SE in the future. So the director role doesn't work out for you, you know,
Right, yeah.
hit
But
me
it's
up if you want to make a transition to SE.
I, I appreciate it, brother. Yeah, it's a hard question because I think that every company is very different, but there's still I think more communication is better than less communication. There's a balance with everything, and you should be gaining everybody's perspectives very very well, and it's constantly testing. That's what an engineer does. You're constantly testing and tweaking little things. You find out what works, keep what works, and then the things that aren't working, how can we shift them so they're going to be more value added in the future?
Yeah, I always say one of the primary differences that I identify as well is from an SE perspective, that's why sales engineers are often called solutions engineers because we're solutioning new ideas. We're coming up with new demos, new ideas, new go-to-market strategies, which sales does that a little bit too. I've seen it from my AEs, especially the really good ones. But typically, it's the solutions engineering team that is identifying potential new go-to-market strategies and new ways to present and solve for potential like just opportunities that your company doesn't typically fall under. They're also the ones that are working with like the product team as well as the sales team to drive uh, any potential product enhancements that are required based on sales ops that are out there. So I definitely see, there's a sales as a team sport. So there's like an intersection there, but there's also clear divided lines in that, sales goes in this funnel. They're bringing on the deals. They're doing the negotiation. SCs are doing the demos. They're, finding the technical requirements. But there's a lot of, overlap there, of course.
There's a lot of overlap and there's a balance with each, but you have to be kind of whenever you're going to anything, even if you're the SDR, you got to be driving, you got to be taking more initiative than the other guys. So as the sales engineer, you got to be driving the process. It's one
Yeah,
of those things where you
100%.
have to be at, I don't know, when you wake up, are you asking those questions like what worked yesterday? What worked this last week? It's kind of a mindset philosophy, I think.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of newer sales engineers where they do the demo and they don't like know how to take it to the next step. Like
Yeah.
it just falls flat. They don't really think about it from a sales perspective that there's a sales process and you as an SE can help drive the sale along to the next step of the sales funnel, which ideally would be to get that purchase order. That's what we're all trying to do at the end of the day. So I would leave that as a challenge for anyone that's listening that's aspiring to be an SE is yeah, knowing the technical aspects are great, but put on your sales hat. There's still S in the title of SE. You still have a sales component and work with your sales counterpart to identify what's the next action items that you're expected to have following this demo call or following this proof of concept. You have clear guidelines on if you meet this criteria, the customer is going to agree to sign that purchase order and become a customer. So there's a lot of golden eggs there that I think everyone should think about. But
Like to
on
quote
that,
like
you mentioned.
Japanese, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I
Sorry, I
was gonna
didn't.
say like with the Japanese way, Kaizen, I'm sure you're aware, like continuous
Okay,
improvement. Yep.
yeah, for sure. That's what I love about sales as well. Is like every day, every week's a little different. Like I feel like I'm constantly learning, despite doing this for almost a decade now. Like there's just with technology and sales, there's just always room for improvement.
Yeah. And these are philosophies that you don't have to be in sales. This is something you could take in any career.
Yeah.
And I kind of believe that the way you do anything is the way you do everything.
Mhm.
And like this is stuff that I do just in my private life. At the end of the day, I always ask myself, and I don't know, I read about it in books, but I was like, I was doing this before I even knew that was a thing.
Yeah.
That I would always ask myself, what worked and what can I do better? Now I ask what worked, what can I do better, what didn't work, but it used to be just like, yeah, what's working, what can I do a little bit better? Just those two basic questions at the end of the day at least gets your head in the right space on how can I just keep marginal gains little bit by little bit. I don't need to reinvent the wheel or do this massive, change your life in 30 days. You don't need to do too big of things. It's good if you want to, but just work on little bits to get you in the right direction and build that momentum no matter where you are in life and you'll see results.
Are you a fan of like rewatching your sales calls and doing all that stuff and critiquing yourself?
Dude, I not really because I realize like how much I like God, I like fidget and like God, you see a lot. It's very powerful, and anybody who's an aspiring salesperson should do this. You should record yourself. You should videotape yourself on a call
Yeah.
and rewatch it. It sucks. I'm not lying. Like I don't like doing it to myself, but I noticed that I need to sharpen the blade, and I always pick up something like why did I do that? I'm
Why
sure
did I use this
when I
many filler
rewatch this, I'll
words?
probably be like, yeah, why did I do that? And it's good to get a somebody who's more senior or more experienced get their take on it.
Yep.
Hey, I'd love to get your input. What can I do better? Can you either watch me live or here's a little bit of a demo of me doing it? What would you think?
Yep.
So
Yeah.
it's
I'm
useful.
big on that, getting feedback and being receptive to that feedback. It also takes a good person or strong person to be able to give like actual tangible and useful feedback to somebody else. So if you end up getting a handful of years of experience for you to actually land in that mentor figure, which I'm sure you're super familiar with as a sales director and mentoring other sales professionals, is being able to translate that and like not just giving them negative after negative, but highlighting the positives first and then saying, well, you know what, you did this amazingly. This was great, but you could, here's one area where I think you could work on a little bit. And being able to deliver that feedback as well, like that's a skill in itself.
This might be a good suggestion. So it's kind of true. Like when I hire people, they do need a level of mental toughness.
For sure.
And that's the thing. It's like, hey, I when I give out like, I love to give out positive news, but occasionally you have to. I have to give you have to be aware of what's not working. You have to be aware of like, hey, we need to change this. You be aware of it, but you focus on the solution, solutions oriented. We focus on the end result that we want to get to, right? So be aware of it. You don't need to dwell on it, but you want to focus on like, how can we fix the situation? So with people, they have to, when I'm hiring people, and this is good for candidates if they're looking at interviews, some things they might want to mention. They have to be teachable. They have to be very coachable, teachable, willing to change and learn. If somebody comes into the organization, they're like they feel like they already know everything, right? They're probably
You
not going to
you
be a
can
good.
tell when they feel that way too.
Yeah. Oh
You can
yeah.
tell, yeah.
Oh yeah. And it happens, and it happens in sometimes plateaus. And by the way, I've been there. There's times I've fallen into the trap where you hit plateaus where you think you've learned enough, and then you kind of coast.
Hmm.
And it's hard to kind of get through with other people, but that's not going to build rapport, especially if you're talking to a recruiter or a hiring manager. You have to be very, number one, mentally tough. You're willing to go through rejection, willing to go through things that happen because that's going to happen. So you have to have a certain level of mental toughness. Doesn't mean you got to be Navy SEAL, but you have to be like, I'm accepting the responsibility and the expectations of the role. And the second thing is being like coachable, teachable, and absorbent. Um, if I feel that you're a person that no matter what I say, you're not going to listen, it's going to go in one ear and out the other, or you're not going to change things, I'm going to be wasting my time. And so you have to be very embracing change and embracing that, hey, if you don't have a sales role yet, maybe you don't know it all. Be a little humble and go into that role eager to learn, hungry to learn. And when people give you feedback, don't don't fall in the pitfall letting your ego get in ahead of you. Like take it as a learning experience. Every day is a learning experience.
Yep. The growth mindset is key. And,
Yeah.
and also it's purpose. Like if you're not growing and you're not learning, like that's when I feel like the beginning of a job is always very exciting and very fun because every day is like drinking from a fire hose. You're learning constantly and you're just absorbing everything like a sponge. And and people say, well, after about 6 or 12 months, like my job starts to almost like fizzle out. Like I don't get that excited feeling anymore. And typically that's because of a lack of growth, a lack of learning.
Yeah.
So as you get there and you start to feel content in your role, and this is for anyone that's even looking to get into a very completely new profession, try to take on new objectives, new tasks. Tell your manager and work with them and say, you know what, like I'm starting to feel a little comfortable. Where can I take my career from here? Where can I step in and take on new responsibilities? And as long as you're growing, you'll feel like you have purpose in what you're going to spend 8 to 10 hours, hopefully not 10 hours, hopefully 8 hours a day in your day job, which is a big, bulk of your time. But on
Yeah.
that note, so you have your own YouTube channel, so I want to shift gears there. And having a growth mindset means outside of work as well. Obviously, you do a lot. You have a very interesting backstory with whitewater rafting, living in Japan, having your own YouTube channel. Outside of that, though, do you have any other things that you really enjoy doing, or any other side hustles that you want to mention?
So I have a photography business. That's another thing that I do.
Okay.
That's, weirdly lucrative, to be honest. Didn't expect that one to be it. But I would say that, yeah, I do help, I wasn't setting out when I did the YouTube channel. It was kind of like a way of just sharing content, sharing tips that people can, get good at. And it started with, especially when I was at a cybersecurity company, helping people get into cybersecurity and candidates. And now it's morphed into like pretty much all these other people, helping them through all walks of life. Students have reached out to help, hey, I got an interview coming up. Can you help me practice? Can I have a resume that I'm not so sure about? Can you take a look?
Mhm.
Totally. Or a LinkedIn or just consulting in general. Sometimes they need, hey, like, I don't know how to get a promotion or negotiate a salary, or, how do I get to the next level of just life? Weirdly, I gave relationship advice the other day. So
Going to be a
that's what you
therapist in
want.
the
I feel like
future.
I'm okay. I feel like I have a very great relationship. Yeah, getting married soon. Have a lovely fiance, and it's kind of crazy on a lot of ways on how this all goes. But if people want to reach out, they're more than welcome to. Um, I usually try to give a little bit of a freebie and give a little bit of pointers, for a first phone call. If you need
Mhm.
something beyond that, we can talk about it. But it's rewarding to help other people. I think I've helped like at least 25 people get new jobs now, which was
Nice.
really like out in the side hustle, not as my recruiter, as like just like, here, let me spruce up your resume or mock interview. Um, so that's one thing. And then yeah, I'm into like lifestyle because I believe it's all one life. I believe that if you have a good health, it's going to actually raise your sales because you're going to have more energy and people are going to feel that energy. If you have a great relationship, it's going to give you more just areas. All the areas I think um, health, wealth, relationships are kind of synergistic.
For
If
sure.
one goes up, the other ones are going to go up.
And what if one goes down? The
Well,
other
you got to work.
person,
You got to be aware of it. And how do
yeah,
we turn this around?
it's hard
What
not
can we do?
to, if you're
Yeah,
having a rocky relationship. I've seen it before with
yeah.
not actually my coworkers, but I've seen it with some of my customers before
Mm.
going on site where
Oh yeah,
I went with them and they like literally poured their life story about how they're getting a divorce and their wife's taking their business. And
dude.
like it
Yeah,
was, you could
I
see
could go on that topic too.
yeah, you
Yeah,
could see on their face how much that's impacting their ability to do their job function because
yeah,
that's where their mind's at. It's such a critical part of your life that if everything's not all in balance and in synergy, yeah, it's just naturally going to have impacts on other parts of your life, even if you're cognizant about it.
yeah. And I'm not saying you should be aiming for perfection.
Mhm.
It's never going to be perfect. You can always be improving certain aspects, and you find out. Um, this is why, like, when I look at sales, what are the top salespeople doing? How can I emulate that? How I'm going to try it for myself, see if it works. It's kind of the thing, same thing
Yeah,
that I use in like all the other areas. Okay, let me find all the best health people, right? The biohacking community is a great community that has like some great like tips that I try. Cold showers. I'm doing a bone broth cleanse this weekend again for the second
I
time.
can't
Like
do that. No way.
I'm glad you're getting me at the beginning of the day, so I'm like, God, you see me on Monday, I might be like, oh, right. We'll see. But same idea is you can use that kind of engineering methodology in all aspects. And you should be aware of those things because it will actually equal, if it can get you one more extra sale a year, especially if you're doing like $10,000 commissions,
Yep.
isn't it worth it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, great stuff. So besides Ryan's channel, and by the way, he has a really great video on building out your resume where he actually will walk you through a resume and give you tips on what works and what doesn't work. I've actually sent some of my students to that. So definitely check that out if you're looking to build out your resume. But besides that, do you have any favorite podcasters you listen to, favorite books, favorite YouTubers?
Yeah, there's a few. Let me say this one. So books wise, I mean, I have probably 100 books in my library that are amazing. If I were to pick it, the first book that ever kind of got me, I guess, into this who I am nowadays, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People.
Mhm.
It's kind of funny. I was actually at a college party in June Lake in the mountains, snowed in. It was supposed to be a snowboarding trip in like this person's cabin. Everybody's, in the party state. I'm the one guy that like I see the book on the shelf. It's a random person's house. Started opening it, read the first couple chapters. I was hooked. Went home, bought my own copy, and that's been a continuous book that I've read at least once a year.
Yeah, cool
Great book to
story.
do. The second book I actually read this more recently, The Compound Effect. The Compound Effect was a book that I think took 80 books that I've read and really put it into a nice summary of everything. So it's a really good, like you're gonna get a lot of stuff out of that one. Um, a third book, I'm into energy, and I think that it's very, new agey, but The Secret. Read The Secret if you haven't, because I think I've used some of those techniques and I've gotten results. So I would check that out. It's a little bit new agey, so I'm not sure if it's for
Yeah, it's the only
everybody.
one that you
But
mentioned I
yeah,
haven't heard of. So I'm going to look it up.
so I would say Compound Effect, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, The Secret, and then old school selling is there's a book by Frank Bettker called How I Raised Myself from Success. Sorry, How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success Through Selling. It's a guy who was a down and out major league ball player, didn't have any skills, got hurt, and went to one of the top salesmen in the world. This is written back in like the 40s. So it's a little bit old school, but there's still underlying principles that every salesperson can use.
Awesome. I'll make sure to put all of those in the YouTube description below. Any favorite podcasters, or are you more of a reader than a podcast
I'm
listen?
more it's kind of funny. I'm going through actually some Tony Robbins material
Yeah, I'm a fan of
through
Tony as well.
audio. Yeah, I've been to his event in Tokyo, funny enough.
Okay, cool.
And that's a whole other story. There's one audio series that if you can find it, it's worth looking into. It's called Your Wish is Your Command. This is probably something that a lot of people haven't heard of. This was also maybe the second biggest thing that I thought, like after Seven Habits, was a
Hmm.
big turning point. Um, it teaches you more on how to make, it's more about how to make money, really, but it's a good listen. It's a long one. It's like 14 hours, but it's
Okay.
worth it. It's not on book. You have to get it on audio. Um,
I
I
think it
think I
was
have a
Tony's book too. It was like Money Matters or something like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
That's what got me into investing and trying to actually learn about how to handle my own finances. So if you're all new into it and you want to just like get a good intro into a lot of these different subjects, like Tony has some great content.
He
Did you
does.
read Life Force? His
I
like,
just bought the book.
yeah,
I'm
I read
actually
about half of
I'm
it. That's
standing right now on a grounding pad as we speak, so I'm
okay.
like using some of the stuff. But yeah, it's and that's like little things like that, by the way. It's like you're gonna be doing sales. If you are standing, there's studies done that you will close more sales if you're standing while talking to your customers, right?
Interesting.
Also, they talk about 10,000 steps. You should be taking 10,000 steps a day. Standing is the new or sitting is the new smoking. So having a standing desk. I just, me and Ryan were talking earlier about having our standing desk. Yeah, like little things around me you can use to optimize your day health wise.
Yeah.
So like, I have kind of my bone broth and I got a grounding pad. So he's like, you can kind of kill it. You should always put focus on the things, but you can kind of kill a few birds with one stone. Four birds, but yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I appreciate the time today. Any last things you'd want to leave the audience with, as well as how can they get it in contact with you?
Sure, they can definitely get in contact with me if they want to go over to my YouTube page. I do have my email and my phone number. Be very careful with that one. Please send me a text first. I get enough phone calls through the day, but you can send me a text or an email if you guys want help with anything, if you want help with your career, or want some advice, or how to kind of, or even a professional reference. If you're looking for kind of like just, I've been in the same shoes where I was job hunting, and I wish I had somebody who could help me that way. And I'll do my best. I can't if obviously I do have my own stuff on life, but I'll do my best to kind of help everybody. They can definitely reach out to me through that way. I would say one other thought was, and I was teaching a student uh, 2 days ago about this, where if you're doing sales or you're doing interviewing, get out of your head. A lot of people want to kind of keep to the script because it's safe. And it's good to memorize the script or whatever you're going to do for your interview prep. Memorize it, make it your own, and then at the end of it, it's more of from the heart. It's more genuine. People feel the emotion, and that's what moves sales, and that's what
Yeah,
moves communication, is the emotion and the energy and connecting with other people. So try to get off the script. Try to get off the standard thing. It's good in the beginning. That's fine because you got to practice, but try to get into more that feeling state more than the thinking state.
awesome. Well, Ryan, I appreciate the time. I'm sure this will be great for everyone listening. Thanks for joining my very first interview on the channel. So I appreciate that. And yeah, anyone who wants to connect with Ryan, I'll put again his YouTube channel in the notes below. So go ahead and check that out. And just, thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ryan. It's a pleasure. Always love connecting, buddy.
Yeah, awesome. Bye, everyone.